I really like villains. I think that a lot of times the antagonists of a story end up being way more interesting of a character than the protagonist. That's often because the antagonist does have more liberty in what they are able to do on screen as opposed to our heroes. Because general audiences have to, for the most part, like our main character, there's a lot less moral ambiguity that they can operate in. Writers need us to not only be invested in their story and plight, but also sympathize with them. Villains are wholly unburdened by that restraint. In fact, depending on the story, creators want you to hate them. So there's a lot more creativity and freedom in how these characters can be portrayed. So they often end up being a little more interesting than our protagonists. They get to be rude, condescending, mean, self-centered, and in a lot of ways it does make them more human and more relatable at times than our seemingly perfect hero. But as much as I love a really well-written hero, over recent years there's been more concerted effort to flesh out antagonists and make them more complex. Complex villains is a phrase that you've probably heard many times before, but oftentimes when someone says that a character is complex, what they really mean is that they sympathize with them in some way. It's not a clear-cut black and white situation with a good guy and a bad guy. There's some shades of gray. So when people say complex villains, what they really mean is that they understand where the villain is coming from, or even feel they are somewhat justified in their actions. And those character portrayals are really interesting and have kind of become the new standard in storytelling. I think a lot of people think an uncomplex villain means that the story is elementary and therefore not as thoughtful or worthy of merit as stories that have complex villains. So much so that in order to justify why they like an antagonist, some people create complexities in their characterization where there might not have been any. It's almost as if there is this growing uncomfortability among audiences to say that they like something that might be simple in its execution, and so feel a need to bend over backwards to create more depth and complexity to justify why they like it so much. And that has increasingly become the case when it comes to villains. I cannot tell you how many excuses and made-up plot lines I've seen people create simply to justify why they like a villain in a story. And I think it's really interesting the lengths that people go to not only to convince themselves that a villain isn't all that bad, but other people as well to not hate them as much as they do. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to go through some examples of antagonists that people insist are simply misunderstood and that you actually lack media literacy if you fell for the trap of actually thinking they're the bad guy. There are a lot of examples, but these are just some of the examples that bother me the most. Have you ever been personally injured? You may be entitled to financial compensation. Personal injuries could be worth millions of dollars. You could stand to win a large sum of money. But that really all comes down to what kind of legal firm you hire to take on your case. Now, with traditional firms, you may run into many problems like tedious paperwork, high costs, lengthy processing times. That is, of course, unless you hire one of America's leading personal injury firms, Morgan & Morgan. Morgan & Morgan is a personal injury law firm with over 1,000 attorneys operating in all 50 states. If you are ever seriously hurt, your injury may be worth millions of dollars. With Morgan & Morgan, clients have won up to $12 million in Florida and up to $26 million in Philadelphia. Companies often lowball their clients, but Morgan always tries to get the very best payout for their clients. And the best part about it is, the service is completely free unless you win your case. To use their service, you can click the link in my bio or scan the QR code, fill out this application and submit it, and that's it. Someone from the firm will reach out to you regarding your case. So if you ever get seriously injured, your case could be worth millions and you're only a few clicks away from potentially changing your life. You can start your claim with Morgan & Morgan at www.forthepeople.com/Tron or by scanning the QR code on the screen. Ursula from The Little Mermaid. The one that honestly bothers me the most is the recontextualizing of Ursula from The Little Mermaid as just being a savvy businesswoman that went after what she wanted. In Disney's The Little Mermaid, Ariel signs a contract with the sea witch Ursula to become human. The contract stipulated that so long as Ariel was able to get Prince Eric to fall in love with her and kiss her within 3 days, then she would be able to remain human permanently. Otherwise, she turned back into a mermaid and become a captured slave for Ursula. Now, the defense that a lot of people have for Ursula is the fact that she was very upfront with the conditions of the contract. Ursula isn't really a villain, she's just a smart businesswoman. She told Ariel exactly what would happen to her if she signed the contract. It's not her fault Ariel wasn't smart enough to know it was a bad deal. Ursula stuck to the conditions of the contract, and so should Ariel. So in fact, Ursula is the victim because she got killed for simply trying to make a good business deal. Now, doesn't that sound like the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard? First of all, there's just so much misrepresentation of Ursula's character to make this a thing. The crux of the argument is that because Ursula was fully forthcoming with what the contract entailed, she could not have taken advantage of Ariel. But that kind of logic ignores the fact that Ursula specifically targeted Ariel as a way to exploit her to acquire more power. Ursula preyed on Ariel's insecurities and growing desire to be part of the human world. She sends her henchmen to lure her into her cavern to convince her to take the deal.
Flotsam! Jetsam! I want you to keep an extra close watch on this pretty little daughter of his. She may be the key to Triton's undoing.
Which was all part of her larger plan to take power away from King Triton. Even if we agree that Ariel knew the risk she was taking by signing the scroll and did it anyways, we can't ignore the fact that Ursula also manipulated the circumstances to make it next to impossible for Ariel to keep up her end of the bargain. She sent the eels to disrupt her date, and when it became increasingly clear that Ariel was getting closer to Prince Eric and would probably get the kiss, she literally disguised herself as a temptress, puts Eric under a spell, and tries to marry him. Like, in what world is that a fair deal? She manipulated the circumstance of the contract. Honestly, at that point, that contract would be null and void. Ursula's whole plan from the beginning was to try to manipulate Ariel to get closer to King Triton. And once she was able to trick Ariel, she offered her up so she could get to her real goal of capturing King Triton and ruling the Seven Seas. So the idea that Ariel was just dumb and Ursula was just a savvy businesswoman doesn't really hold up. Or that she was wrongfully killed because Ariel didn't read the fine print, just ignoring the fact that Ursula was also trying to kill them. Even in the live action movie, they tried to compensate for that by changing the story to have it so that Ursula also put a spell on Ariel that makes her forget about the contract and her mission to kiss Eric in 3 days.
Don't forget about the kiss. No, not me, the prince. You gotta kiss the prince. Don't you remember? You only have 3 days to... Hello? Oh no. She's put a spell on you.
I felt like that was an unnecessary change, but of course the live action movies have to address every single bad faith critique that people have for the original movies. So that meant adding more scenes to make Ursula appear more evil and vindictive, even though there was already an abundance of that in the original. The live action movie also added more backstory to make Ursula and Trident related, and that he ostracized her from the kingdom to explain and justify why she targeted Ariel and why she wanted to take revenge on King Triton, which again was kind of unnecessary. I just think it's hilarious how the remake really had to be overhanded when it came to Ursula to avoid people tweeting about how it's unfortunate that they killed her just for being a savvy businesswoman. I think the thing with Ursula is that she's a really charismatic character, so people often feel the need to justify why they might like her more than Ariel by implying that she was killed for no reason. I also think that a lot of that stems from the bad blood people have with Ariel as a character in general. Ariel is one of those Disney princesses that has fallen victim to the modern recontextualization of Disney princesses actually not being feminists, being too boy crazy and always needing a man to save them.
If you could be a Disney princess, who would you be?
Cinderella, because she worked for what she got. She wasn't some little hoe mermaid that married a guy when she was 16 that she never had a conversation with 3 days after meeting him.
People hate Ariel because the popular reading on her is that she gave up her life in the sea and abandoned her friends and family, all for a man she doesn't even know, which of course is an ill-intentioned interpretation of the movie. Ariel has been consistently shown to be obsessed with the human world even before she ever met Eric. So she didn't give it all up for a man, she just wanted a new life. But of course, if that's your reading on Ariel, then someone like Ursula, who preys upon that naivety while also using contract law to get what she wants, does make her seem like more of a feminist character than Ariel. The easiest thing would be to just say I like Ursula because she's a really funny and compelling character, but the easy cop-out is to somehow justify all of her shenanigans. Azula, Avatar: The Last Airbender. Azula from Avatar: The Last Airbender is a war criminal. Now, I'm not using war criminal in the most literal sense. Obviously, we don't know the laws of this world. We don't know if her actions really constitute a war crime. I'm just being hyperbolic. But Azula as a character has many admirable traits. She's driven, determined, analytic, and a perfectionist. She has a lot of qualities that a lot of people admire and would want to replicate. So it's not a question why people are drawn to Azula as a character. It makes perfect sense. And because of that, people tend to go out of their way to justify liking her to make her appear as a more sympathetic character, even though she's a huge antagonist of the series. A part of that is also bolstered by the fact that the show offered more backstory into the lives of Azula and Zuko, where we got to learn more about their childhood and upbringing that provided more context for why they both are the way that they are. The common excuse used to justify Azula's actions throughout the show is that she's just as much a victim of her family as Zuko was, and that her participation in the war and colonization was simply out of a deep desire to earn the respect and attention of her father, because he manipulates and abuses her. And it's like, well, sure, I could be on board with that reasoning, but that does not at all take away from the fact that she still did a lot of really horrible stuff. I noticed that with a lot of Azula stans, part of their frustration comes from the fact that people do not talk about Azula in the same way that they do Zuko or Uncle Iroh. People have a much easier time sympathizing with them and forgiving them, even though they are also both war criminals, but that grace and understanding doesn't seem to extend to Azula. And the simple explanation for that is because the show literally created entire character arcs to redeem both Zuko and Iroh. At the beginning of the show, Uncle Iroh was already depicted as being more level-headed and less war-crazed than the rest of the Fire Nation, so it was already easy to sympathize with him, even though before the start of the series, he did lay siege to Ba Sing Se, presumably killing a lot of people, but we're not going to focus on that right now. The point is, Uncle Iroh was a lovable old man who gave great advice. It was easy to not hate him, and the show literally spent its entire 3 seasons redeeming Zuko. We spent the entire show watching his growth. Even when it came to our protagonists, they each got episodes with Zuko where he had to redeem himself and earn their trust. None of that happened for Azula. Ever since she was introduced, she was firmly the antagonist, and even though we got more backstory and context surrounding her motivation, she never changed. So of course people have an easier time looking past all the bad things Zuko did than with her. Another excuse that a lot of people make for Azula is the fact that she has a lot of trauma surrounding her mom and is mentally unstable, but it's like none of that excuses all of the harm she's caused.
I could sit here and complain how our mom liked Zuko more than me, but I don't really care. My own mother thought I was a monster. She was right, of course, but it still hurt.
Yes, she may have been manipulated by her dad, and yes, she might have a lot of emotional trauma, but she still did all of those things. She still attacked cities and colonized other states. She brought down Ba Sing Se. Ozai's plan during Sozin's comet to burn the Earth Kingdom to the ground was literally Azula's idea. It's just hard to excuse all of that because she has mommy and daddy issues and is a little mentally unstable. Like, she almost killed Aang and Zuko. It's safe to say that she's not a good person, and that's okay. She doesn't need to be. People's gut reaction to having more context around a villain's motivation to reduce the impact of the harm they've caused is just crazy to me. Just because we have more context of Azula's childhood and her relationship to her mom doesn't stop making her the antagonist. All it does is give us more context and maybe more reasoning behind why she does the thing that she does. But it's still bad. It's still morally reprehensible. She doesn't stop being a bad guy just because you can kind of see why she would hate Zuko. Trying to kill him is still a bad thing. And to the very end, she's unable to recognize that and come to terms with it, which is why it's so much easier to forgive Zuko and Iroh. And I think it does say a lot that people are so quick to look past all of that to force some kind of tragic backstory for villains, because even with Ozai, let's say we added context to his childhood. All the excuses created for why Azula isn't that bad could be applied to him too. He was the younger sibling constantly overlooked by his father. He grew up in a dysfunctional war-crazed family. Does that mean that all the harm he caused wasn't that bad? Look, you can like Azula. She's one of my favorite characters in the entire show. I love every time she comes on screen. We don't have to lie and make stuff up in order to justify why we like her. Sharpay, High School Musical. So I've already made a video about people recontextualizing Sharpay as a victim in the High School Musical franchise, because people really like Sharpay. She's energetic, a good performer, and is really confident and has a lot of star power. So a lot of people are really drawn to her. And because of that, people make a lot of excuses for her behavior because she's such an interesting and compelling character. In the first movie, the excuse as to why Sharpay was justified in being an asshole to the basketball star Troy and super genius transfer student Gabriella was because, unlike those uncultured plebs, Sharpay actually cared about the drama department and the performing arts. Therefore, she's more deserving of roles and being the lead in plays and performances in the drama department. So the roles and performing opportunities going to Gabriella and Troy, who don't seem to care that much about the performing arts, seems inherently unfair because Sharpay would appreciate them so much more. Gabriella and Troy perform just for the fun of it. They treat it as a hobby, while Sharpay respects it as a serious discipline. My thing has always been that if Sharpay is that confident in her abilities as a top performer in the school, why was she so threatened by newbies potentially auditioning for the roles? That's the thing too, these were just the auditions. If she's as good as she thinks she is, she wouldn't be that worried about two novices throwing their hat in the ring. Also, the reason why the excuse of Sharpay was just so much more deserving of these roles than Troy and Gabriella always fell flat for me, because it was as if Sharpay just sat by and played fair and had these opportunities stolen from her. She actively tried to sabotage and prevent both of them from auditioning. She had the audition date moved on the same day as Troy's basketball game and Gabriella's decathlon to intentionally prevent them from even being able to audition. So yeah, she is the bad guy, or at the very least, very clearly the antagonist. So I never got why she was just so much more deserving of being the lead, because it's like, if she's good, she'll get it, and if there are other people who are better, they'll get it. Also, my reading on Sharpay was never that she respected the performing arts so much and was mad that these people who didn't care as much would taint the experience. It was more so that Sharpay just liked being the center of attention. She wants to always be the star, so she reacted very negatively to the idea that there would be anyone who would threaten her place as always being the star. It really was from a selfish place of just wanting everything to be about her. Even her twin brother Ryan is allowed to share the stage with her, but never upstage her or pull attention from her.
Me is you, no one like you.
Then is really
Something's not right.
really rough.
Up to the top.
The most frustrating excuse of all time, though, when it comes to Sharpay is for the second movie. At that point, I'm somewhat convinced that you must have never seen the movie if you can defend her whatsoever. The infuriating excuse I see people make for Sharpay here is that she gave all of the Wildcats a great summer job out of the goodness of her heart. That, and not only that, but also lined up multiple opportunities for Troy to get him into a good university and on track to be a huge basketball star, and they took those opportunities for granted and treated her so poorly. And it's like, that's not at all what happened. Sharpay never wanted the entire class to be there. She only wanted Troy. Troy said that he wouldn't take the job unless his friends were also hired. Mind you, Sharpay only got the job for Troy because she wants to spend the entire summer with to win him over, even though at that point, Troy was already in a relationship with Gabriella. And when his other friends showed up unexpectedly, she made her mission to make their time there as miserable as possible so they would quit and she would have Troy all to herself. And those amazing scholarship opportunities she got for Troy was just a way to manipulate him to be with her. Sharpay doesn't actually care about Troy or his future. She doesn't even really like him, to be honest. Her obsession with Troy just stems from wanting to be with the most popular guy in school. She wants to be with him because of what that would do for her own image. It's all about her. She wasn't being altruistic, she was being selfish. Even if that meant throwing the one person who cares about her under the bus, her brother. I just don't see how anyone could draw a different conclusion from that movie. Like, at that point, you're not even finding excuses, you're just rewriting the movie and making up scenarios in your head. Regina George is so popular that her popularity has transcended the movie. She's the most popular character in the movie, and she's also the most recognizable character in the movie, to the point that she has become even more popular than the main character, Katie. You know, if anybody were to dress up as a character from that movie, you would immediately be able to recognize Regina as a costume, but maybe not so much Katie. Regina is just one of those antagonists that is so much more recognizable than the protagonist. And because of that, people have tried to create more depth to her character and make her seem more misunderstood and create made-up scenarios and reasons as to why she isn't as bad as people make her out to be. And that even shows in the musical remake. In the stage musical and the movie musical adaptation, Regina is front and center and she takes up more space. The recontextualizing in response to her popularity in pop culture has been to make Regina seem more like the main character than even Katie was. But the excuse that people create is that, well, Regina is mean, she is a mean girl, but so is Katie and Janice.
See, at least me and Regina George know we're mean. You try to act like you're so innocent. Like, oh, I used to live in Africa with all the little birdies and the little monkeys.
But Their meanness comes out of a response to how Regina was to them. And two wrongs don't make a right, but Regina also is a very mean person. She mistreats the people around her, and it's okay for you to like Regina. Regina is iconic, and she is such a memorable and quotable character. She does have a lot of great one-liners, but she's not a good person. She's mean, and that's okay. But people hyperfixate on how Katie went over the top and that Katie was not right to do the things that she did to Regina and betray her in that way, even though Regina was mean to her first. And it's like, maybe Katie did go overboard in how she responded to Regina's meanness. Maybe it was a bit much, but that doesn't make Regina any less of a mean girl. Even if we're going to say that Katie was more of a mean girl to Regina than she was to her, now what? Regina is still a mean girl. She still did all of those things. So I think people just try to find a way to make excuses for her because of how popular she is. Because she's just so much more popular than any of the other characters in the movie. They try to justify why they like her by deflecting blame and painting Katie and Janice to be the actual antagonists. The reason I think so many people have this incessant need to create excuses for antagonists is a general uncomfortability with a character they like not being widely well received. I think there is this gut reaction of wanting a character you like, or at the very least appreciate, to also be perceived that way by the people around you. And my theory is that feeling actually comes all the way from old Hollywood, when censorship in motion pictures were at their peak. In the earliest days of the movie making business, Hollywood had a very contentious relationship with the state. Outside of more seemingly progressive states like California and New York, there was a nationwide concern that movies were immoral and were depicting harmful ideas around religion, patriotism, and sexuality. There was also a lot of scandals happening at Hollywood at the time. People did not trust Hollywood, and filmmakers and a lot of states were beginning to adopt their own censorship laws about what could and could not be shown in films. The concern among studios at the time was that if every state had their own censorship laws, it would require studios to make multiple versions of a single film just to have them played in a specific state. So the easier answer to that was self-censorship. And a formal unified body of rules surrounding censorship in films was created, called the Hays Code. The Hays Code was very comprehensive and extremely restrictive in what could be shown in film. Any studio that did not comply with the code would not have their film be shown. In fact, filmmakers had to submit plot summaries about what movies they wanted to make, have it approved and vetted under the Hays Code, before production would even begin. The Hays Code forbade nudity, any explicit displays of sex, depictions of homosexuality was forbidden, depictions of interracial couples were forbidden, and it stipulated that any characters that committed a crime had to be punished by the end of the film. Studios were not allowed to make villains or antagonists sympathetic. They did not want the audience relating to them or feeling bad for them. So that stipulation created a very black and white depiction of heroes and villains for years in old Hollywood movies. Anytime a character was shown to do something bad, it was the movie's responsibility to condemn their actions and have them be punished for it in some way in the film. So there was no complex villains. The bad guy was just the bad guy, and you were just meant to root for the hero to stop them and save the day. And I do think that because for decades audiences were conditioned to that type of depiction of antagonists, when filmmakers began to deviate from that in later years after the Hays Code was abandoned and they were allowed to make villains more sympathetic, flesh out their backstories and make them more relatable, it became a really novel idea. At the time, audiences in any way feeling bad for the bad guy was completely unheard of. So I think the pendulum really swung in the other direction, where the depiction of a complex villain became more appealing to audiences, and Hollywood continued to write more antagonists like that, to the point where it's very hard to find any antagonist or villain that doesn't have a somewhat well-established motivation for why they do the horrible things that they do, or why they think it's right. In the 1920s, a character like Thanos would simply just have to be a crazy alien who wanted to destroy the universe and was stopped. But in modern Hollywood, we need you to feel for Thanos. You have to understand and even sympathize with him. You may even walk away from Infinity War thinking, he kind of has a point. So I think because that has just become the norm for modern movies, audiences are now retroactively going back to other villains that may not have clear motivations behind why they're assholes, and are creating them themselves to add more depth to them, make them more complex, all to justify why they like them. Because it might be a little embarrassing to just say Scar from The Lion King is your favorite character. So maybe instead of him just being a basic mustache twirling bad guy, he was supposed to be the actual king, and Mufasa stole his spot. That's why he hates him, and that's why he killed him. There. Don't you feel so much better now saying that Scar is a good villain? No one can argue with you because now he has a good motivation, even though it's not at all necessary. So those are just my thoughts on why I think this is happening a lot with audiences and how Hollywood is kind of exacerbating that problem. I like villains with good motivation, I enjoy a good backstory, but I don't necessarily think that this is the end all be all on what makes a good villain good. The Joker is Batman's main villain and he never really has a very clear motivation as to why he does anything that he does, but people really like him anyways, and you don't have to go down the route of he was just this beaten down, mentally ill, poorly treated clown that had a string of bad luck just for you to feel sorry for him just to justify why you like him. You can just like the Joker. Sometimes I enjoy the simple mustache twirling bad guys because they're still fun to watch and they really challenge the protagonist in interesting ways. Sometimes the bad guy or the antagonist is just a tool to push our main characters to where they need to be. And if they can effectively do that, I'm fine with it. It's okay to say you like them as is. You don't have to force a backstory or motivation to justify that. So let me know what your guys' thoughts are on this below. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.